how were you as a child?
Well, I was very smart, and I was a rebel. So I was an agitator right from the beginning. I really had to find my own truth.
I didn't know you were a high school teacher. How did you choose?
I didn't choose it. I grew up all my life wanting to be a doctor, but my ADD got in the way. Yeah, so to get into medical school, you have to study sciences. And my brain is not oriented to study sciences.
At some point, you observed that you were addicted to work.
Yeah.
How did you become aware of it?
So at some point, I had to realize that this was causing harm to my own mental balance, to my sense of peace, and to my family. So it's when you recognize the harm you've been keeping doing it, that's when you have to acknowledge that you have an addiction. If your response is anger, it proves that you're an addict. If you want to see anger, deal with a teenager who's addicted to the cell phone and try taking his cell phone away.
How did you become attracted to each other?
That right from the beginning, she saw my light and she also saw my darkness. And she made it her duty and responsibility to dispel, evaporate the darkness. No, that's not her job. She should never have taken it on. Nobody should ever taken the job of dissipating somebody else's darkness. It's their job.
If you were a fresh parent in today's world, how would you go around parenting and what would you focus on?
If I was a new parent today, I would not let my kids near social media for many, many, many years. I would not let them see a screen.
Acest episod foarte special din podcastul Mind Architect este oferit de Banca Transilvania. Hello everybody. I am extremely excited to have the chance to speak to you in English. It's the first Mind Architect episode that we're doing in English with a very special guest. As you've probably seen from the thumbnail episode, we have with us today Dr. Gabor Maté. It is probably my greatest professional honor since I've been doing the Mind Architect podcast to have the chance to be part of this interview and this conversation. And before we get the conversation with Gabor Maté, I have a very special guest with me here, without whom this conversation wouldn't have been possible. Cristina Bâră, the director of Compassionate Inquiry Romania. Thank you, Cristina, for being here with us.
Thank you for having me here.
I am very happy that together we managed to make this happen. You're also the facilitator and circle leader in Compassionate Inquiry Romania, trained in the neuroaffective relational model, or NARM, with the wonderful book Healing Developmental Trauma that we talked about previously, working with complex trauma and currently training in dance and movement therapy also. So Cristina is one of the people who made this conversation possible. Gabor is in Romania and he's going to participate in, when we're publishing this, he already participated in the National Compassionate Inquiry, in the National Conference for Compassionate Inquiry Practitioners. And because Compassionate Inquiry is his creation, alongside with Sad Dharam, I'd like you to share a few words about the method, about your relationship with Compassionate Inquiry and how you discovered it. And then, guys, we're going to get to the conversation with Gabor.
Thank you so much for having me here, Paul. It's a great pleasure. And, on my way here, I was driving finding some parking slots, as you know.
Like we're having fun in Bucharest, Romania.
Yes, of course. And I almost had tears in my eyes because I was looking back at the moment when it all started. And I have goosebumps right now talking about it because I did a training in Compassionate Inquiry in January 2019. It was the first cohort which was launched internationally. And we were like 6 or 7 people who from Romania who are doing the international training. And since then, there are hundreds of people, Romanian speaker people who did the training in English. And this year we launched the program for Romanian speaker audience. And it's been quite a journey. I know when I was doing the training, I connected with the teachings and the material there and so on, with everything that Gabor had to share with us. And I was like, oh my God, I want to bring this work and make it possible for as many people, in Romania as well. Because no matter how well you speak English, there's also the words, certain words that have a certain meaning or weight to them. So
in your national language,
yes.
native language.
So it's amazing that we are able to do this work, and we really want to thank Gabor Maté and Sadaram for making this work possible.
It's an amazing method from the things I've seen about it. I have enrolled to the Compassionate Inquiry self-guided course, and I also know you offer that, and you offer it in Romanian. I was one of the people who used to say, I had a nice childhood. Everything was cool. Nothing bad happened. Nothing really bad happened. And it's amazing how the method gets to the root of things. This is one of the reasons why I really appreciate it. And I'm impressed of how it works. What I'd like you to share with the audience, and guys, thank you for listening to us at this intro about CI Romania. What are the opportunities, both for professionals and for clients, regarding compassionate inquiry in Romania? So
for our Romanian-speaking audience, we have the professional training, which is a year-long training addressed for therapists, mental health practitioners, coaches, so people working with people. It's a 1-year program, and then we have a mentorship program for those who want to certify in this approach in compassionate inquiry. And if, for example, there are people who are interested in learning more about the approach but don't necessarily have the time or the resources to invest into this program, then they have the option to join the self-guided short course, as you did, right?
The live one, the first one, is it online? Is it with physical
Everything
meetings?
is online.
Everything is online.
Because we have Romanian who live abroad, so they can join anytime, and there's the possibility to choose your slot. So we publish certain slots, you choose one that works for you, and then you meet regularly with a group at during the respective slot.
Perfect.
So that's the year-long program. Then we have as I mentioned, the short course, which is self-guided, so you can start it anytime. But you'll get in contact with some materials, and you'll see Gabor practicing and working with people.
That's the part I love best. The case studies with him working with people in conferences. I like that. I learn a lot from that just by looking at the way he interacts. Is really insightful.
And sometimes it's like reading a good book when you just want to close the book and let everything sink in. So I experienced the same with watching videos and him working on the stage with people. And then we also have for the general public, the general audience, people who are interested in self-development work and to get in contact with their own emotions, connect with the body more, learn about triggers and work with the inner parts and so on, develop more compassion towards themselves. They have the possibility of joining a program which is called Compassionate Inquiry Circles.
Okay.
So it's a personal development group, a closed group with, let's say, 12 people, maximum 12, 14 people in each group. And they will meet for 10 weeks, 2 hours per week. Well, they connect with the facilitator and also experience compassionate inquiry on themselves. So there's tons of possibility, and more projects will come in the near future. So we're very excited for that.
I want to congratulate you for everything you're doing. And I think we together as a group help people become friends with therapy more. For the international audience watching, I don't know if it's applicable in the countries where you're watching from, guys, but in Romania, a lot of people went to therapy or believe they should go to therapy only when they're insane, or we have a lot of people still thinking, unfortunately, that you go to therapy when you're insane. But throughout the years, being part of this personal development movement, I've seen people opening up more and more, and I'm really happy that Compassionate Inquiry is in Romania. You translated the course, you're doing this in Romanian. We need more, I think, therapists to have this type of approach. And before we move to the conversation with Gabor, teasing you guys, I want to invite you to share, in your view, being part of the first group of people who got trained in Compassionate Inquiry, how would you define the method? Like, what's the essence of Compassionate Inquiry, maybe in comparison to other therapy schools or other ways of looking at things? I'm curious how you feel it after working with it for these years, and why would somebody use this approach?
That's a very good question, Paul. So thank you for that, because makes me stop a bit and reflect. But the first image and the first feeling I had in my body was the heart opening. So this is what I experienced. Also joining the training, because it brings you back to yourself, and we so much need that, right? Because there was a saying, if compassion does not include yourself, it's not complete. So it needs to start with yourself. It's the sense of heart opening, and then you can connect with other people in a deeper way. And this is also what I love more about this community, because it's kind of like we're infected in a way, and it's beautiful what's being created.
I know from people going through the Compassionate Inquiry training program that you do a lot of work on yourselves. Mm-hmm. So this idea that the therapist is the instrument of healing and change, not necessarily the knowledge or the techniques or the tools, but the therapist itself being the tool, is actually something you really practice. If you walk the talk a lot, you work a lot with yourselves, right?
And this is what Gabor mentioned, I think, in one of the calls. He said, well, people had these expectations that they're going to join a program and they will learn a lot of tools and so on. But actually, they had a surprise that you're actually working on yourself a lot.
And segueing towards the conversation with him, he's a person that has worked a lot with himself throughout the years. I love the humbleness in a way. He says that he's 80 and he was far more stupid when he was just 78 or stuff like that. I love the humor.
Young and stupid, yeah.
Yeah, and the humility. And I think, and I feel privileged of having the opportunity to do this interview with you and with him, because you rarely see somebody who doesn't stop learning and working with themselves, especially when they reach status, they reach influence, they become well-known, they become icons in a way, at least in their field. And he's one of those people. So thank you again. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to do this. Before we start the conversation with him, I just want to ask if people want to enroll in the programs that you mentioned, or if they want to become Compassionate Inquiry practitioners, where can they do this in Romania?
So they can look up the website, compassionateinquiry.com, and there on the upper right corner, there's a button called Română. So press that one and it will take you to the Romanian page, and you also have contact details there if you just reach out.
Excellent. And if they want to reach out to you personally as the person who's leading the movement in Romania, where can they find you?
Cristina at compassionateinquiry.com.
Excellent. So guys, thank you for staying with us for this intro. I hope we're going to be able to bring to you a very insightful conversation with Dr. Gabor Maté, a personal conversation. That's what we're aiming for. I hope for each and every one of us watching that we're going to have the openness to take in the ideas that are going to be shared in this interview, as much as he was open in working with himself and sharing his life work and his personal life throughout the years. For the international audience, thank you for listening about Compassionate Inquiry in Romania, guys. Thank you for bearing with us. And now, with no further ado, Dr. Gabor Maté. So, guys, when we started the Mind Architect podcast 5 years ago, I never imagined that one day I would be able to say, welcome, Gabor, to our humble studio. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being in Romania. And thank you for all the good anxiety that I'm experiencing now. As you know, we talked a little bit about this before we started, that you're very loved in Romania. People have read your books, all 5 of them. They appreciate it. The Mind Architect audience especially, I think, knows a lot of your books. Yeah. So I'm going to ask for your permission to go into the personal side of the story. I remember you shared many times in different instances about your start in life, the first month, your mother giving you away in order to protect you and what that impacted. Yeah. I don't remember ever hearing about your childhood, adolescence, and what happened afterwards. Like, how do you remember yourself as a child? How were you as a child?
Well, I was very smart, and I always did very well in school. I was a rebel. So under the communist government, I remember once the government was organizing one of these voluntary contributions where the parents had to give money voluntarily, for some kind of project.
Yeah.
And I remember standing up in class saying to the teacher, but this is not fair because, my brother and I both go to the school, which means that our parents have to give twice, And then I got a note from the teacher that to take home to my parents that he better watch it because he's agitating his classmates. So I was an agitator right from the beginning. I really had to find my own truth.
Yeah, I was curious, this was happening in Hungary?
This was in Hungary.
In Hungary,
yeah,
before you went to...
This is communist Hungary. This is in the 1950s. Until 56, there was this Stalinist dictatorship under their own version of Ceausescu. His name was Rákosi. And it was brutal. And, of course, I didn't know anything about it because my parents wouldn't talk politics because they knew better, And our teachers, I remember one teacher in grade 3, on December the 28th or something like that, he said, boys, this is the shortest day of the year, and it's also Stalin's birthday. But this is the darkest day of the year. It's also Stalin's birthday. But don't tell anybody I said that. That's the only hint I ever had, that there was something bigger going on. And then a revolution happened in 56 when I was almost 13. And all of a sudden, my world changed. So I grew up a rather committed little communist. I really believed in the system. I still believe in the values that they pretended.
Mm-hmm.
Equality, people not exploiting each other, people being brothers and sisters, freedom. That's what they taught. Mm-hmm. And I believed in that. What I didn't realize is the contradiction between what they were saying and how they were behaving and what they were actually doing, which is horrible, as you know. So it was an interesting childhood. Also, at that time, I hate to tell you, but we had the best football team in the world.
Really?
Yeah, in 1950s, yeah. We beat Romania several times. We beat everybody. For 3 or 4 years, we didn't lose a single game until the World Cup final, and the Germans beat us, and that was 1954, so that was 70 years ago now. No Hungarian who was ever alive then has still left forgotten that humiliation. Terrible,
I'm curious, you said you were smart and you were a rebel and you were an agitator, and from all of those things to some extent probably are still with you.
Of course.
Were you into sports? Or
I wasn't very athletically talented, but one of the benefits of the communist regime was what they call mass sports. Mm-hmm. So everybody was given a chance to participate, whether or not you're going to be a champion or not. I was never going to be a champion, but I really learned how to swim well. And I swam a kilometer a day at the public pool with really good coaches. So to this day,
you still do it?
I swim. Yesterday I swam 1,600 meters, and so that was really been good for me. So no, I wasn't athletic, but I was a participant.
I'm curious, looking back now that you've turned 80, what were your most important needs when you were in puberty or adolescence? What was most present with you in terms of what you would have needed from your parents or from your teachers, especially as I know about the ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah.
How did you experience that, and what would you have needed to be different?
Well, adolescence was a very difficult time for me because it's a time when the adolescent really needs. It's a very insecure time. It's a time of lots of changes. Your brain is exploding. Your hormones are coming online. Your sexuality is waking up. You do need a lot of structure and guidance. And my parents, we just arrived in Canada. The revolution happened just before my 13th birthday, and we arrived in Canada just after that, 2 months later or 3 months later. But my parents could no longer provide the structure because they were too busy necessarily trying to make a living in a new country. Plus, I spoke English better than they did within a few months. So I was more able to orient myself than they were, which means there was kind of a loss of that necessary beneficial hierarchy. And I experienced myself as very lonely because the rapid change, and I'd left Eastern Europe as a kind of budding young Eastern European intellectual, you know. I was reading serious literature by the time I was 13. We came to Canada. Canada was a very wild country. People weren't just, you know, you walk around Bucharest or Budapest and you see history. Cobblestones, old buildings, tradition. Vancouver, which is on the west coast of Canada, it's all new, the past doesn't matter. People have no sense of tradition, or at least way back then they didn't, the sense of history. So I really felt out of place. And I was lost for a few years. And for a few years, I stopped reading books. I started eating lousy, terrible Canadian bread. I mean, if you want to taste bad bread, you should eat Canadian bread. You know, they have no idea about bread there. Now they do, because all the immigrants. But then it was all white. It's like chewing cotton batten, you know. And I just watched mindless American TV shows. And basically I gave up my intellect, and I gave up my what I was passionate about the world. Now, looking back, that was necessary for me to become acclimatized, to become a Canadian. But it sure felt strange and lonely in those days.
I'm curious, we have a lot of parents in the audience, and you moved when you were
13,
which is a very important time.
It's a difficult time to me.
A lot of parents nowadays are moving because of work, as you share in the book, in The Myth of Normal. We have a culture that we need a village to raise a child, but there's no more village.
Yeah.
For the parents watching us who need to do this, for whatever reason, how can they make this easier for a child, looking back even at your experience? What could have been done, given the circumstances, that would have made the move easier for you?
Yeah, and those circumstances are very prevalent in Romania today. I heard when I got here that there's tens of thousands of children whose parents have moved abroad to make a living. Now that, you know, that's...
After Syria, we're the second most migrating country on earth.
Is that the case?
Yep.
Is that right?
2 million, I think, Romanians live across the border because they went to work.
And that may be necessary, but it's a dislocation. You're losing your context, you're losing your sense of belonging, and your children, if you leave them here, they're losing you. And I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I understand why people believe they have to do that, or never mind believing it, why they have to do it. But at least they have to realize the impact on the children. And those parents who are here with their kids, but they don't see them the whole day because the kids are in school and the parents are working, you got to make sure that the time that you do spend with them is very special.
Okay.
So don't assume that your kids are your kids just because they're your kids. They're not. When they don't see you the whole day, when they spend the whole day with their peer group, with their friends, at the end of the day, you have to win them back. You have to bring them back under your wing. That means you have to spend quality time that isn't based on how's your homework and what happened, and certainly not the cell phone, but family meals on the weekends. Get them out into nature, away from these things, if you can, because maybe they're already addicted to this. But what I'm trying to say is, as much as you can, give them your attention and your presence to make up for what is being lost. I mean, that's my best advice.
Yeah. I remember this from Hold On to Your Kids.
Yeah.
You talked there a lot with Gordon. You felt about this. we have parents that are talking about two things, and I want to ask you from a first person.
Yeah.
If somebody has a child that shows signs of difficulty focusing, or even maybe they've been diagnosed with ADHD, how can the parents help? What can they do? Because in Romania, a lot of parents have this difficulty that we talked about. They don't have a lot of time. Some of them are working 2 jobs in order to be able to be there. And that has an impact on the kids.
Yeah.
But if you were to look back with your needs when you were a kid, what could they do in today's world if they had a kid with this?
Well, the first of all, the thing is to realize is that these kids are highly sensitive. They tend to be highly sensitive. They tend to have more asthma, more allergies. Allergies are called hypersensitivities. These kids are just more sensitive, which means they feel more. So whatever is stressful or difficult or painful, they feel it more than other kids. There's no point telling them, don't be so sensitive. It's like me telling you, don't be blue-eyed, or whatever. Like that's just who you are, And and they're very sensitive to the environment. That's what's genetic about it. That's their nature. The ADD, no matter what you read or what anybody tells you, is not genetic. If it was, it wouldn't be going up all the time. Genes don't change in a population over 10, 15, 20 years. So what's changing is the environment. Now, if you look at the tuning out, the absent-mindedness, it's not a disease. It's actually a coping mechanism. And it's one way that people deal with stress. And usually in families where there's attention deficit disorder, A, you got a sensitive child, B, you have stressed parents. And that infant is absorbing the stresses of the family and is protecting themselves by tuning out, by going absent-minded. So it's not a disease. It begins as a coping mechanism. This is at a time when the brain is developing, and the brain develops under the impact of the environment. So that's the environment turns the genes on and off. Mm-hmm. You can have the same genes and not have ADD, or have that or some other problem, depending on what happens. So once you realize a kid is like that, first of all, realize they're very sensitive. B, they're probably quite talented in one way or another. Very often they are. They probably have a very warm heart. They sense things and they have a lot of empathy. At the same time, they feel insecure because when things are stressed, the child feels insecure. So what they need more than anything else is emotional security. And that means you have to really understand them. Not just try and change their behavior or try and teach them better ways of paying attention, but really make them feel emotionally safe. My book on the subject, which in English is called Scattered Minds, has just been republished in Romania this week, I think. And I know it sounds like self-advertising, but I'm telling you, if you got a person, either yourself or your child, who's been diagnosed with that condition, that book is going to change your life. Because it's all about how to change the environment so that we can promote healthy brain development in the child. And if you want to promote development, you have to look at the conditions, which is good, which means that your child is not doomed to stay that way for the rest of their lives. Look, I myself, when I wrote my first book, Scattered Minds, I took medication. That was 25 years ago now. And everything I wrote then has been validated by science ever since. But my most recent book, which you mentioned, The Myth of Normal, it came out 2 years ago. It's much more complex. It's much longer. It took a lot more research. I didn't take any medication at all. I don't need it anymore. So in other words, you can create the conditions for healthy brain development at any age, especially in childhood. So that's my advice is, if you got one of these kids, you got a decision to make. And you might have to give up some of your external interests and devote time to this kid. and those few years, they're going to pay off in the long term.
I think it's a wonderful perspective that healing can happen at any moment, and the environment has such an important impact.
Yeah.
Both the environment in our mother's womb, then the first years, and then throughout life.
But one more thing, if I can jump in.
Please.
Unfortunately, the schools don't get it.
Yep.
They look on these kids as behavior problems. They punish them. They make them feel bad about themselves. In other words, they continually undermine the child's sense of safety.
Which makes it worse.
Yeah. So the schools really got to wake up. And unfortunately, most educators in their training, like most doctors, never learn about human development or brain development or the interaction of emotions and brain development, and yet that's just pure scientific fact. So not just the parents have to change, but the schools have to really reconsider what they're doing, and so should the medical profession.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I was really happy. I've been to several of your conferences in Romania, both the one you did with the Institute for Trauma Treatment with Diana and Compassionate Inquiry, and it really warmed my heart to see that there were teachers in the room.
Yeah.
There were doctors, and not necessarily psychiatrists, but cardiologists and other specializations. And I remember Petronella posted from Compassionate Inquiry that you had people from 40 countries at the conference here.
I think it was, okay, it's 40, it's 40.
That's what she said, I don't know.
I thought it was even more, but maybe just 40. Okay.
Yeah, so it's, I think, things are changing, and I really want to thank you for what you're doing. I know I didn't know this until I got prepared for the episode. I didn't know you were a high school teacher at some point, and you were talking about educators. How did you choose to become a high school English and literature teacher?
I didn't choose it.
Ah, okay.
What happened was, I grew up all my life wanting to be a doctor.
All your life?
All my life, yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't know why. Probably more than one reason. One is I like the idea of helping relieve suffering. Another may have been, unconsciously, my grandfather, who died in Auschwitz, was a doctor, a family doctor and a writer. And maybe I wanted to replace him in my mother's heart, because she really idolized her father. You know, I don't know if that was the reason, but looking back, I'm thinking maybe it was. Also, of course, as a doctor, you're pretty much assured of a decent living. So I had all kinds of reasons. But mostly that's what I wanted to do. But my ADD got in the way. Yeah, so to get into medical school, you have to study sciences. And my brain is not oriented to study sciences. I can study literature, history, and it doesn't take me discipline. Because with history and English, I was smart enough and fluent enough that I could read 4 or 5 books in a day, and the next day write an examination and do okay. But you can't do that in calculus. You can't do that in organic chemistry. You can't do that in physics. You know, so that I just wasn't ready to work that hard. I couldn't focus. I wasn't going to work that hard. I never worked that hard. So I taught high school for 3 years because that's what I could do with my degree. But, and then this happens to me. I just woke up one morning. I said, no, medicine is calling me. And that was that. So it's not, I didn't choose to become a teacher.
Teacher, yeah.
I did enjoy it, but something in me said, no, this is not me. And so then medicine called me. By that time I was 28, I was more mature. I was capable of doing the heavy work.
I remember from some of your books and also from speeches that you said that because you didn't feel wanted when you came into the world, you decided unconsciously to be necessary. And that really struck a chord in me, because I think there are a lot of people that didn't feel that type of love, warmth, accepting energy when they came into the world. So they decide to become famous or necessary or powerful. Or you talked about Trump having the elections again. So I really see this. In a way, I'm curious if you see a red thread between your careers, like teaching, becoming a physician, working in palliative care, and then teaching again, but mixing them now and writing.
That's the beauty of it, Paul, is that in the end, it all comes around.
Mm-hmm.
So even though I didn't exactly choose to be a teacher, I was pretty good at it, you know. And I'll tell you a story. One of my patients, when I was a family doctor, was a very well-known Canadian poet. His name was Warren, and he would come into my office, and we'd have these conversations. You know, I mean, we'd talk about the medical stuff, but I always just talked with my patients. And once I said to him, Warren, I want to write, but I don't know what. And he said, you know, Gabor, you'll write when you have something to teach the world. And when I found out about, I did write newspaper articles on medical things, political things, but in terms of writing a book, once I found out about attention deficit disorder, and I realized that what the medical profession is saying about it is neither intuitive nor is it scientific, I thought I got something to teach the world. And that became my first book. And then I started speaking about it. So again, I ended up coming back to teaching, which is partly what I do now.
Yeah.
So it forms a perfect circle.
I'm curious. I know from your work that you said at some point you observed that you were addicted to work.
Yeah.
I also had people who loved me say this to me, and it's a very similar theme. And I see it in a lot of people. I didn't even realize that you could be addicted to work and not substances, because, you know, we're more easily aware of that.
Yeah.
How did you become aware of it? Like, what was the context in your life, and how did you become aware of being addicted to work?
Well, if we understand what an addiction is, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with substances.
Yeah.
Addiction is shown in any behavior where you crave something because it gives you pleasure or relief, and then it causes harm, and you don't give it up. So it could be drugs, nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, opiates, stimulants. Could also be shopping, eating, gambling, pornography, sex, work, extreme sports, gaming, the internet, cell phones, eating disorders, etc., etc., etc. As long as you're craving it because it gives you some hit.
Mm-hmm. And relief.
Yeah, in the short term, or a jolt that you want, and it causes harm. So at some point I had to realize that this is causing harm to my own mental balance, to my sense of peace, and to my family. So it's when you recognize the harm, and you've been keeping doing it, that's when you have to acknowledge that you have an addiction.
In your case, did you acknowledge it with help of other people? Because I want to share something in my personal life, and I've seen this in the story of a lot of people, including my parents.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not accidental that I also see it in them. When people would tell me you're working too hard, you're exhausting yourself and stuff like that, I'd become angry. And I would say that...
You got angry, you said?
Yeah, angry.
Right.
And I would say, do you think I love doing this? Do you think I want to do this? But if I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it? If I'm not paying the bills, who's going to pay the bills and stuff like that? So I'm curious if in your experience and in your life, when you had these messages from people you loved, how did you react? How was it for you? Did you have any resistance to it?
It's very interesting because in my case, it was mostly my wife who said, I can't stand what you're doing. It's not good for me, it's not good for you, it's not for the kids. And my response is anger. No, that's very interesting that your response is anger. if your response is anger, it proves that you're an addict. Because if you weren't an addict, you know what you'd say?
Thank you.
Thank you for thinking about me, and I'll have a look at it. And it really makes a difference to me that you care enough about me to tell me the truth as you see it. But the anger is that of an addict in denial when somebody's trying to take away your drug. If you want to see anger, deal with a teenager who's addicted to the cell phone and try taking his cell phone away. If you want to see anger, try dealing with an alcoholic and try taking his drink away. If you want to see anger, look at yourself when somebody says, you got an addiction here, and you get angry because somebody's trying to take away your drug. So those questions that you raised, I have to make a living, I have to put bread on the table, those are legitimate, but they're not a cause for anger.
Mm-hmm. What was your process of working with yourself, of healing? When you became aware of this, what did you do?
Well, a lot of things. Psychotherapy. I did a lot of reading. Reading, yeah. I also did a lot of scientific research. I didn't do the research. I reviewed the research. I attended retreats. But mostly, by far the biggest work has been in my relationship with my wife. Because ultimately, I wanted that relationship to work. So that means I constantly had to keep looking at myself. So that was the biggest ground of my learning.
Yeah. I think for many of us, the couple's relationship is probably the strongest mirror and the most painful mirror. I find this really interesting. I'm going to segue, since you brought up your relationship with your wife. When did you meet her?
I met her when I was 22 and she was 18, and I was a columnist for the student newspaper at the University of British Columbia, and she was an artist, and she was given an assignment to do a caricature of me.
A caricature?
Yeah, so the first time I met my wife, she did a caricature of me. I should have known right then and there.
She's the one.
She's the one, yeah.
And how did you feel? How did you become attracted to each other? How did you become...
Well, I was actually going with another woman who I was actually deeply in love with. But with Rae, my wife, there was something special. We just talked so easily together. And we played together so well. So it was, apart from the physical attraction, which wasn't any greater than with somebody else, but the soul connection, the being able to see the world and really wanting to know the truth about the world and about ourselves, and just the playfulness, that's what ultimately cemented our relationship.
I know that she's an artist.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if in your case, the fact that you're both interested in literature and have a philosophical side to you, you're open to the arts, and you said that your brain understands easier things like this. Was in your case this idea of opposites attracting in any way, or was it more the fact that you were similar?
Well, it's both.
Yeah. I
mean, in some ways, we're very different, but in where we're similar is we share. When we look at the world, we tend to see the same thing. Mm-hmm. So that's a big one. We all think that we live in the same world. We don't live in the same world. We live in the world that we see.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And we do see the world much the same, Rae and I, whether it comes to personal relationships or movies or good literature or politics, But the other side of it was that when we marry somebody, it's always somebody who's carrying the same degree of trauma that we're at that time. And so I was traumatized, she was traumatized differently, under different circumstances, but deeply. And there's something in us that always brings us together with somebody at the same level of trauma. Why is that? Because usually we were traumatized or wounded in our families of origin. Where did we want to find the love when we were kids? In our family of origin. So as soon as we sense something about the other person that energetically reminds us, even not even consciously, but energetically reminds us of our origins, oh, this is why I want to get to love. And so, Ray's father turned out to have many of the characteristics that I had. And Ray also said that right from the beginning, she saw my light, and she was attracted to that. And she also saw my darkness. And she made it her duty and responsibility to dispel, evaporate the darkness. Now, that's not her job. She should never have taken it on. Nobody should have taken the job of dissipating somebody else's darkness. It's their job. And it always costs the person who's trying to do it. It costs the relationship. But, of course, she loved her father, who had many wonderful qualities. He had also had a deep, dark side. And Ray took on very early that that's her responsibility.
You said in the CI conference that men are looking for women to mother them.
Very often, yeah.
Yeah. How does that apply to you when you were young and you met her?
Well, we have emotional needs as children. I mean, we're born with them as humans. It's part of our nature. To the extent that those needs are met, we mature, we grow up, and at some point we can meet our own needs and not rely on somebody else. We might ask for help and support, but we don't need them anymore to meet our emotional needs. To the extent that we don't get what we need, we never mature. We stay stuck in a kind of a infant role where we want somebody else to emotionally look after us. Now, in this culture, I'll tell you an interesting example. At this Compassionate Inquiry conference that is just concluding today here in Bucharest, a lot of people want to get their pictures taken with me. So women come up to me to get their photographs. Sometimes tall women, almost automatically, they all shrink. They make themselves smaller. They're so programmed to meet my infantile needs for feeling good about myself that they make themselves smaller.
Yeah.
And it's automatic. They're not even thinking about it. So this is a society where women are programmed to meet the needs of men, emotionally speaking. If the men's needs are in some ways infantile, the woman tends to take that on. And it becomes partly an adult-to-adult relationship, but partly it's a mother-child relationship. And that has two built-in problems, which occurred in my own marriage. One is it's exhausting for the woman, and it's a source of physical and mental illness, number one. Number two, the man, as much as they want that kind of mothering energy, they also resent it because they don't want to be controlled. And the women tend to get kind of...
You experienced that?
Yeah, we experienced that. My work addiction and then my shopping addiction. Ray really tried to control me, and I hated it. And thirdly, real children come along, and the mothering energy that the woman puts into the adult male is deprived from the real children. And the fourth problem is sexual. Because once I get into a mother-child relationship with a woman, no healthy guy wants to sleep with his mother.
And no mother wants to sleep with her child.
No healthy mother wants to sleep with her son.
Yeah.
So the sexual people wonder what happened to the sexuality and the passion. That's what happened. So, not to give away secrets, but if you get older, and as you get older, you let go of these childlike needs on one hand and these automatic mothering roles on the other, the passion can come back. Because now you're with this person that you really love and you want to be with, you know? And so that mother-child dynamic is really tough on relationships.
I know you shared in the conference that you had moments when you considered getting a divorce, the two of you.
Yeah, like last week. That's my automatic.
With the travel.
No, last week I was away, so that's no. It's my automatic default setting. It's like, oh, there's a problem here. What am I doing in this relationship? This is after 55 years.
You still feel
No.
as the automatic one?
No, I don't. But you know what? It's only been very recently that I give that one up.
Wow.
And because I don't do it. My brain does it automatically. The brain says, get out of here. You're not happy. Go find happiness somewhere else. You know, it's immature. It's like, you know, the 2-year-old who says, I'm running away from home, you know. But it's automatic.
I really feel you with an avoidant attachment style.
Yeah.
That's also my default. Not only in couples relationships, but when I'm not appreciated, when I don't feel that I'm being seen or appreciated, I have the tendency to say, okay, I'm going to be by myself. If you're not happy, go away. It's really interesting. And one of the things that really helped in my healing just by reading your books and listening to you is the fact that it's an ongoing process. And I think it's one of the most valuable things that you've brought to the public conversation. The fact that, as you say, I'm 80 and I was much more stupid 2 years ago. Which I find endearing and fun.
Yeah. It's also true.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'd like to ask you, 1 in 2 people that get married get divorced in today's world. More than the rate of divorce has gone up way more than 50%. And in your marriage, what were the moments when you felt, the two of you felt, that this is not working? When did they appear? Were they around kids or?
Well, I'd say 2 major dynamics. One was the unhappiness on our kids. Because the kids are picking up on all our stresses, all our dysfunctions, and all our tensions. And one of them actually said to me once, Dad, I wish you and Mom would get a divorce. And I said, why do you say that? And they said, I don't know, but I think my life would be better. And you know what? Their life would have been better. And going back, my wife and I were so happy. We're together, 55th anniversary this November. But we also realized it would have been healthier at a certain point to separate, not to permanently say goodbye to each other, but not to be together. And even if, and be together for the children, but not to have the ground of our children's existence always so stormy and so insecure. And then, you know, just at times you get hopeless about your relationship. Like, God, we've been working for so long and we love each other and it's still not working. You know, so our kids' difficulties and unhappiness and their own. Those are the 2 drivers of the divorce route.
And what were the drivers of you staying together? How did you find the resources and how did you manage that?
One of them wasn't a positive one. It was my wife's fear of abandonment and being a mom with kids. You know, even though, of course, I would have been there,
difficult
financially and emotionally, but her own fear, which had to do with her own childhood trauma of abandonment. But the positive things, and maybe something similar on my own part, that, okay, this is life. It's just, life's going to be unhappy. Well, this is life. You know, not seeing any other possibilities. But the positive drivers that kept us together was a deep love for each other and our commitment to the truth. I mean, we always wanted the truth. Eventually, as much as I might want to deny the truth, eventually I always wanted the truth. So did she. So that we would just stick around and keep digging until we found the truth.
You shared even in our conversation now that people have a tendency to get into relationships when they are at the same level of trauma.
Yeah.
Staying in a relationship, would you say, from your experience, but also from your work, requires the two people to heal synchronously?
Well, it's not for me to say what other people require, but it's a big opportunity to heal together, and which means looking inside mostly, not trying to change the other person, but trying to understand what is it that I bring to the relationship. So often between Ray and I, the problem wasn't what was happening. The problem was how we were thinking about what was happening, how we were perceiving, how we were interpreting the other person's behavior.
Yep.
And that can change. In a really good marriage, it requires mutual growth. If only one person is growing, the other's not, it's not going to work.
In my experience, and also looking at the people we work with as a team, first you become aware of stuff, and awareness is important, is probably the first step.
Yeah.
But sustainable change requires us to embody the feelings and to process whatever
that's right.
is distorting our reality. In your case, you started therapy when you were what age?
I was probably close to 40.
Close to 40.
Maybe even more than 40.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, what were the breakthrough emotional moments for you? Because I know change is a process and healing is a process. It never ends. But can you put your finger on some moments when your heart opened, when you felt that something clicked inside and things looked differently?
Yeah. Well, the therapist that I had was very smart, a lot of insights, but also very intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
So that the work I did with him never brought me to really vulnerable moments. And frankly, also, in retrospect, I didn't feel safe enough. I mean, for vulnerability, you have to feel really safe.
Yeah.
And for good reasons, I never had that with him. I had those moments between my wife and I. I really did. And without therapy, just this opening. That happened a lot. But other than that, a big hardening opening for me happened during a plant ceremony.
Which was late in your life.
It was late. It was 2009, I was 65. 65.
After 20 years of work, 20 plus years of work.
Yeah. And I just remember the moment of my heart opening and just the tenderness. And actually, there was a little baby in the tent, and the baby started cooing and making little sounds, and my heart just opened up.
I appreciate you sharing this, and in Romania still plant work and plant medicine is not yet legal, unfortunately. I think that it's important for us to acknowledge this idea that true change and sustainable healing actually happens both when the mind and the heart.
It has to happen in the body. Well, actually, yes, in the mind and the heart and the gut, and the whole body. Yeah. It turns out that neurologically, scientifically, we do have a nervous system, not only in our heads, but also in our hearts and also in our guts. I mean, literally, there's a nervous system in our heart and our gut. And true awareness, true knowledge, happens on all three levels. So the knowledge that's up here in the head is very powerful, it's very important, but it's very limited. Mm-hmm. And people that are always up in their heads they become professors,
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm not putting anybody down, but I've seen the limitations of the intellectual life.
Yeah.
The benefits, of course, but also the limitations. So for true knowledge, true wisdom, you really have to have an openness of the gut brain and the heart brain and the cerebral brain, and a connection between them.
Plant medicine aside,
Yeah.
for people who embrace this idea that understanding is just the first step and who've been to therapy, maybe they understand things about their childhood, they see the links, they read your books or they read other books and they understand stuff. Could you share some of the moments between you and Rae, or maybe between you and your kids, that helped you open your heart and feel that had nothing to do with formal therapy, like formal therapy contexts?
Yeah, just the biggest need that people have, apart from shelter and food and so on, and apart from physically being held when they're small, is to be seen and understood. And the greatest trauma, the essence of trauma, is not being seen and not being understood. So when I really see her, I'm no longer seeing my projection or my idea of her, my interpretation of her, my perception. But there's this person. That's when the opening really happens. And the same with the kids. And there was an interesting study done once between the therapists and clients. And they, as I mentioned, there's a electrical nervous system in the heart, which emanates radiation, which you can measure. You can also measure the radiation from the brain by means of electrical studies. And these therapists and the clients, they were talking to each other, and at the same time, their radiation energies were being measured by machines. At certain times in the therapy, there was a synchronicity between the waves projected by the therapist and by the client. They were in the same wave. We talk about being on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
They were on the same wavelength. Now, they didn't know when that was happening. I mean, they couldn't see the measurements. But in retrospect, when they asked them, when did you feel most at ease or most together, it was precisely at those moments when they were on the same wavelength. And what was interesting was that happened more when the therapist was listening rather than when the therapist was talking. So when you really hear and see and understand another, that's when the synchronicity happens.
It's really interesting, the fact that I recently heard this idea. We have a lot of trainings and stuff like that on speaking, public speaking, nonviolent communication, and so on and so forth, but not so much on listening.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something. I've never heard you talk about this, and I'm curious how your relationship was with this topic and also in the couple's relationship. We have a lot of anxiety around money in today's world. We don't speak a lot about it with our friends. It's in Romania, maybe it's the same in other places, but in Romania, people have a tendency to keep it actually a secret, their relationship to money and stuff. How was this throughout your life? Like adolescence, then when you became a teacher, then a physician with Rae, what was your relationship with this over time?
Yeah. Well, let me think. I never gave it much thought.
No.
When I was a child, we didn't grow up in a country where everything was all about advertisements and products. It was, just life. And nobody had cars, nobody had TV sets. One family in our neighborhood in 1954 or 5 got a TV set, and that's only because they were circus acrobats, and they traveled abroad.
Okay.
And they brought home a TV set, and at that time, Hungarian state television broadcasts 1 hour a day. So
Same here.
we didn't grow up with these status symbols and possessions, and nobody had cars. If a car passed outside our house, everybody ran outside to see the cars. So I didn't go, and we had enough food. We had the clothing that we needed. So I didn't grow up with any sense of scarcity. What I didn't know is that my mother's sister, my aunt, who was a doctor, she helped to support my parents.
Yeah.
Otherwise, my mother would have had to go to work, and my mother stayed home with us. Coming to Canada, it began to shift because my dad was 49, my mother 40. Within a year, they had another child. So now they had a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a new baby in a new language, in a new country, where my father really struggled to make a living. So for them, there was a lot of insecurity.
Did you feel it when?
I saw their insecurity, but I didn't so much feel it. Once I became a doctor, I remember being anxious about, will I be able to build a practice and make a living? And, it was totally irrational, but it was based on what I'd seen my dad go through and his deep insecurity. On the other hand, once I started making money, I didn't care about it. Like I didn't worry about saving money, or I thought this was always going to be enough, and it has been. My wife, who grew up in a home where there was a lot of economic insecurity, has been much more anxious about money than I have been, beyond what's rational. She grew up in a home where parents really struggled, and so for me personally, I've been rather non-responsible around money in some ways, but it's not a big problem. I mean, and least of all these days, because of my books and so on, I never have to worry about making a living.
I know a lot of couples have issues around money, and it's one of the main tension points that sometimes lead to divorce. I'd like to go we're heading towards the end of the talk, and I really appreciate, especially with your voice, being able to handle this. I know you're working on a new book with your son. Hello Again.
It's called Hello Again, a fresh start for parents.
They're adult kids. And
adult children. But let me come back to the question of money for a minute.
Please.
So I'm not an average person when it comes to my relationship to money. I can't be a guide to anybody else. But what I can tell you, there are genuine concerns about money, and then there is perceived problems around money. And many of the issues amongst couples around money have less to do with the present moment and more to do with what they're carrying from their childhoods.
Absolutely. What
happened in their families of origin. Now, look, as you mentioned, Romania is a country with more emigration than most other countries. Surely people are doing that because economically they believe that they have to do that. So I'm not minimizing the money problem here. But I am saying to people, if there's tension around money in your family, don't push it under the covers. Talk about it and decide what is based on present genuine concerns and what is based on past anxieties that you're carrying from your childhood. So just clear it. Don't not talk about it. Money is huge. Money is energy. You get money because you expended energy. So it's really important that money issues are talked about in amongst couples, and really sorting out what is genuinely in the present that we have to deal with and what anxieties may we be carrying from the past.
Yep. Thank you for that. It's really, really useful. I also empathize with that because I grew up in a family where I didn't feel we lacked stuff.
Yeah.
But my father, who became an entrepreneur after the communist regime fell in the 90s, always was preoccupied about this. They had fights at times around money. And I can see in my life that no matter how much I have of it, there's a preoccupation and anxiety. And at least I see that it's not coming from my personal experience, but it's something I took on.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you about your book, and also I want to invite you to have an imagination exercise with me. If you were a fresh parent in today's world, with social media, with all of the toxic culture that you shared in the book, how would you go around parenting and what would you focus on?
If I was a new parent today, I would not let my kids near social media. For many, many, many years, I would not let them see a screen, except maybe in my presence, talking to their grandparents on Zoom. Mm-hmm. Maybe your kids' grandparents live in Cluj, and you live in Bucharest, and so that there's a distance. How wonderful for your kids to be able to see their grandparents on Zoom once a week and talk with them. But apart from that, I would not put a cell phone in their hands. I would not let them near a screen. I would not let them have any screen games. Children have a need to play, free, spontaneous play out in nature. That's evolution-determined need of the child. Also, these devices not only are addictive, they're designed to be addictive. Mm-hmm. And if you do brain scans on kids at 3 or 4 years of age who spend too much time on screens, it damages their brains. You can see the brain damage on the brain scans. This has been done. I wouldn't let them near it any more than I let them drive a car when they're 3 years old. You know, at some point you let them drive a car when they're mature enough to handle it, but not until then. So this is discussed fully in our book, Hold On To Your Kids. In fact, we wrote 2 new chapters just recently, post-COVID and the digital age. So if I was a new parent, I have nothing to do with digital media around my kids. And I certainly wouldn't sit there looking at my cell phones, because I want to give the kids, do you really want to give your kids the impression that this thing is more important than they are? Well, that's the message they get. So that's what I would do if I was a new parent.
Thank you so much. We've recommended several times this book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. I believe it's message. And it's wonderful because he also shares some practical things like no phones until 16, no social media until actually no phones until 14. I think no social media until 16. So
the one thing he doesn't say, I don't think, I haven't read his book, but read the reviews, is what makes all that work is the quality of your relationship with the child.
Absolutely.
So you have to have a strong attachment relationship. If you don't have a strong attachment relationship where the kid is looking to you for advice, you can do everything he recommends and your kid won't pay attention. Yep. So you always have to put the attention first. And then if the attention is working, everything he says is absolutely accurate.
Thank you very much for your effort, for your work. I hope you're going to be blessed with many more years to be with us and to enjoy your life and everything that you built and everything that you experienced, to enjoy your family. I can't wait to read the new book. Okay. I hope you're going to be happy with everything that you've built. I want to invite you as the closing thing to share something with the audience. We have quite a large number of people watching from Romania, and you've been here a few times. Maybe you have a message for the people you've seen in the conferences or for the Romanian people, because I also know you're preoccupied about the world context and not just individuals.
Well,
what would be your message for...
Well, I'd say something that's political on the one hand, and then something that is not. On the political level, in terms of what's happening in the world, Gaza has been breaking my heart since last October. I mean, Palestine has been breaking my heart for decades. And I can't stand it that after what my family went through, because we're Jewish, in Eastern Europe, now we've taken so much of that suffering and imposed it on Palestinian people who never did us any harm. They didn't come to Europe to bother us. We went there hoping to create a new land. That's understandable. But what we've done to them and what we continue to do to them and the daily destruction and the death of children, it just breaks my heart every day. And the whole world is watching. And when I was a teenager, my head would spin sometimes when I found out about what happened in the Second World War. And I thought, how could the world let this happen? Well, this is how. You know, terrible stuff is happening now, and the world is not doing a thing. That's one thing I would say, and I say it everywhere. The other thing is more personal. Again, on a Jewish theme, Martin Buber, who's a great Jewish philosopher, who, by the way, really believed in peace with the Palestinians. But he studied the great Jewish spiritual masters. And he wrote a book called Tales of the Hasidim. Hasidim are an Eastern European, including they were here in Romania as well, Hungary, Poland, spiritual, ecstatic, mystical Jewish group. Some strains of Hasidism still exist. But Buber went back to the original Hasid masters and wise people and teachers and rabbis, and he wrote a book called Tales of the Hasidim. And my favorite one is very short. It's a rabbi, Zushia, who says, when I go to the next life, they're not going to ask me why I wasn't the great Moses. They're going to ask me, why weren't you Zushia? In other words, why weren't you yourself? And I think that's the biggest question that we all have is, are we being truly ourselves? Are we following our own guidance, our own truth, our own heart, our own guts? Or do we spend our time trying to impress and please other people? So my biggest advice is, and my biggest learning in my life is the importance of truly being ourselves, and not to beat ourselves up if we're not, but to be very compassionately curious about what is it that's stopping me from truly being myself. So that's the message.
Thank you for being yourself and bringing to this table both your mind and your heart. Gabor, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here with us. It's been a pleasure. I am Paul and you've been watching Mind Architect. Acesta este un material gratuit prin care echipa Mind Architect contribuie la dezvoltarea personală și la cunoașterea de sine fundamentate în știință. Dacă vrei să aprofundezi subiectul pe care tocmai l-ai ascultat, devină și tu membru Mind Architect Premium, unde ai acces la peste 130 de materiale audio-video, rezumate infografice și recomandări de resurse. În plus, și poate cel mai important, întâlnirile MA Live, unde poți intra în direct cu echipa noastră pe teme care te interesează. Și acces la grupul de Facebook privat, unde ținem aproape de comunitatea abonaților. Iar dacă vrei să înveți în ritmul tău, te așteptăm pe mindarchitect.ro în secțiunea Online Academy, unde te așteaptă cursuri certificate, cu informație clar organizată, cu suport vizual excelent, teste și studii de caz. Poți asculta în continuare gratuit episoadele de podcast Mind Architect pe rețelele de podcasting precum Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube și pe mindarchitect.ro. Iar dacă ți-a plăcut acest episod și crezi că i-ar face viața mai bună cuiva cunoscut, ne-am bucurat tare să ne ajuți cu un share. Conținutul Mind Architect nu este destinat și nici nu trebuie interpretat ca fiind utilizabil pentru a diagnostica, trata, atenua, vindeca, preveni sau un alt mod a fi utilizat pentru orice boală sau condiție medicală. Nu reprezintă substitut pentru consultație psihologică sau pentru muncă terapeutică.